This morning's sermon contains mentions of child death, and both the gospel reading and the sermon mentions violence against women. If these are subjects that are sensitive to you, I invite you to take care of yourselves well. Feel free to step out of the sanctuary and get a breath of fresh air or an early start on the coffee downstairs. If you are online, I invite you to turn off the sound and return to us in about 10 minutes. If you don't feel comfortable leaving the sanctuary, that's understandable. Feel free to scroll your phone, grab a hymnal or Bible from the pew in front of you, take a look at the bulletin announcements, but I invite you to take care of yourselves. The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 20th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Some Sadducees, who say that there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married a woman and died childless. Then the second and the third married her. And so, in the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is God not of the dead, but of the living, for to him all of them are alive. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Job is a man whose whole life has fallen apart. In a single day, Job had all his livestock stolen or burned to death, all his servants murdered, and all his children die in a tragic house collapse. And if all that wasn't enough, he also has itchy sores covering every inch of his skin. Job's world has disintegrated. His place in his community has disappeared. His family is dead. And even his own body is betraying him. His entire self and his surroundings are dismantled and undone, replaced only by suffering and desperation. Yet, when we meet up with Job in today's reading, he cries out with wild hope, even amid his desolation. I know that my vindicator lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see on my side. In making this pronouncement, Dr. Anna Marsh, assistant professor of religion at High Point University, suggests that it's as though Job is yelling at God. Hey, remember redemption? Because I sure do, and I don't see it anywhere around here. I wish I could say that God answers Job right away, but God doesn't. It takes almost 20 more pain-ridden chapters for God to show up and answer Job. But God is indeed Job's vindicator, Job's redeemer. God does indeed live, and so does Job. God restores Job's fortunes. God heals his body. And God does appear to Job in his flesh. The theoretical figure in today's story by the Sadducees is a woman whose whole life has fallen apart. According to Deuteronomy 25, if a woman's husband dies before the two of them have a son together, the deceased man's brother must marry his widow, and her firstborn son will be considered not the brother's child, but a son to carry on the name and legacy of the deceased first husband. I'm sure this goes without saying, but this is definitely a law that was written by a man. This woman, already grieving the death of her spouse, is passed from brother to brother like a hand-me-down coat. While she's guaranteed not to be homeless, since each brother is obligated to provide for her basic needs, she may yet remain hopeless, essentially the property of 7 different men, each with his own household and his own treatment of her. At this point in the reading, the Sadducees wonder, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. But Jesus sets the Sadducees straight. This woman will not be given in marriage to anyone. Never again will she be subject to the violent, degrading laws of men. Never again, Jesus explains, will she be in such a precarious position, subject to the whims and desires of 7 different men, but more like that of an angel, serving God, seeing God, and lovingly embraced as God's child. Because the life of the world to come will be so much more just, so much more whole, so much more life-giving and life-sustaining than they or we can imagine. This morning, some of us may be feeling like our whole life is falling apart. Like Job, perhaps we're facing the loss of our livelihoods, the loss of family members, the loss of our health. Like the unnamed fictional woman in the story by the Sadducees, perhaps we are facing the loss of a spouse, the loss of financial security, the loss of bodily autonomy. Like Job, maybe we choose to yell at God, to challenge God, to rail against God, practically daring God finally to show up and vindicate us. Or, like the woman, maybe we feel completely voiceless, a mere pawn of the powerful, compelled to survive by custom, tradition, and desperation, with our tears as the only prayer we can offer. As Jesus points out to the Sadducees, those in this age are bound to the norms of this age, subject to economic realities and financial scarcity, subject to physical constraints and mental illness, subject to sin, subject to suffering, subject to death. But I wonder, what would Job's story have been like if, yes, his friends sat with him in his grief, but they also helped him to regain his health, assisted in providing for his financial needs, and restored him to the wider community. I can't say for sure, but maybe God might have shown up a lot earlier in Job's story. What would the Sadducees' story have been like if they could have imagined a society in which unmarried women's security didn't depend on being treated merely as the extension of one's father, one's husband, one's son, and instead dared to recognize in every person the divine image of God, with every person worthy of security and dignity and a voice? And what might our story be like if we took seriously Jesus' words? If those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead were released from all of our death-dealing, culture-bound norms? Because Jesus invites us too to envision and enter into a different age, one of thriving and abundance, one of salvation and healing, one of forgiveness, one of delight, one of life. While we work and wait for this age of injustice and illness and death to pass, and the age of righteousness and healing and resurrection to come, we can cling to the example of the fearless faith of Job, a man with nothing left to lose, resolute in the conviction that our Redeemer lives, and that our Vindicator will stand upon the earth. We can grasp with both hands Jesus' promise that those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead cannot die anymore, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And we can depend upon Jesus, still speaking into our lives those words of hope, yesterday and today and forever. For our God is God not of the dead, but of the living. For to God, all of them are alive. Amen.